The title of this presentation is the Aero Station. In this lesson, we're going to learn the parts of the aero. We're going to talk about how to inspect the aero for safety. We're also going to learn to make a few simple repairs. This is important because you want to make sure that your equipment is in proper working order, and you'll be able to, by making these simple repairs, be able to keep your equipment in operation and your students shooting more often. So as we name these parts, first thing I want to draw your attention to is the blue metal part here. It's the shaft. In this case, it's made of aluminum, and in the National Archery in the Schools program, aluminum shafts are all that we use for safety's sake. These plastic feathers are called vanes or fletching. There's 3 of them on this arrow. Notice that one is a different color than the other 2. The one is called the index vane, and that's the one that's always facing towards the archer when you nock the arrow. The plastic end of the arrow is called the nock, N-O-C-K, and that's what's put on the string. And the other end, the sharp end, is called the point. There's a point in that arrow. And then right up here towards up on the shaft is an area with identifying marks telling what name arrow this is and what size it is. It's an 1820 used in this program. This is an area called the crest of the arrow. Native Americans used to have different colored bands here, and that band pattern would identify that as my arrow or your arrow. So shaft, vanes, index vane, nock, arrow point, and crest. Now that we know the name of the parts of the arrow, we can inspect the arrow to make sure that it's sound and okay for our students to shoot. First thing we'll look at, we'll make sure that there's a nock on the arrow. If the nock is missing, obviously you won't be able to attach it to the string. If the nock is damaged, if the lobes are bent or cracked in any way, the nock has to be removed and replaced. The nock must be there and it must be in place. How the nock is aligned in relation to the index vane is important. The notch in the nock needs to be perpendicular to the index vane in order that when you attach it to the string, the index vane will be facing the archer rather than the bow. So make sure the nock is there. Let's take a look at the shaft. The shaft should be straight. It should be without bends, cracks, dents, or breaks. This is a very straight arrow. One way to check to see if it's straight is I can have a flat surface like this table. I can put the arrow down, the shaft on the table, and you'll watch the nock end of the arrow, see if it wobbles when I roll it. When I roll it, the nock turns true, which means this arrow is pretty straight. There are other ways to check straightness, even machines. You can spin the arrow if the point is very sharp. You can spin the arrow and feel it wobble or see the nock end wobble. If the arrow is straight, that shaft's okay. Here's one. Let's check and watch the nock end of this arrow and see if it wobbles or not. It wobbles. You can also hear the rattle on the table. This is a bent arrow. So it needs to be, at these close ranges, you could probably shoot an arrow with a slight bend in it, but once the students find out, they'll not greatly appreciate that arrow. The bent arrow should be retired. We need to make sure there's a point on the arrow. If the point is missing, this is a hollow shaft. This is a tube. If the point is gone, every time you shoot the target, you're going to take a core out of the target. You'll damage your targets. They'll wear out sooner. Also, the arrow is going to fly poorly. Without the point, the arrow won't hit where the archer would like it to hit. It might even miss the entire target. It'll be so improperly balanced. If it's bent or damaged, that can be fixed with a file, or if it's just a slight bend or a roundness, that won't hurt for the archer to shoot it. The vanes are the last thing I want to look at here. There should be 3 in most cases. Some arrows have 4, but most cases are 3. You'd like to have all 3 of them there. If you have an arrow that's missing a vane, this arrow is missing a vane, that arrow could be shot again at close distances and hit the target, but it'll be better to retire that arrow until the vane can be replaced. If the vanes are all present, but some of them are damaged, here's one. One of these green vanes has an arrow hole through it. That vane is okay to shoot. At these distances, it may make a little bit of noise as it goes down range, but that shouldn't disturb the archer, and it should shoot just fine. So a hole in the vane is all right. If it's a big flap there in the vane, you can take a pair of scissors and cut a V around that flap and make a notch in the vane, and then it will shoot all right. If the arrow, one of the vanes is torn loose, like this one is, that vane should be removed because it could catch on the arrow rest. It'll also make a lot of noise going down range. It could fall off going down. So if you see that, the arrow should be retired until the vane can be replaced. By the way, if the arrow is missing more than one vane, it shouldn't be shot at all. If if it only has one vane or none, it may not even hit the curtain at close range because it could be very erratic in its flight. Now I'm going to show you how to remove a damaged knock and replace a new one. Here's a knock that is loose, and so I need to remove it. If one of the ears or lobes were cracked or bent, I would take that knock off and put a new one on. Oftentimes I can take a pair of pliers and I can just put them on this knock and twist it. In that case, it broke the glue contact and the knock came off. If it were hard to get off, if I couldn't break that contact, I could take a knife and flare up the edges of the knock a little bit and then twist with the pliers and the knock should come off. I'm trying to be careful to keep the end of the arrow where the knock's going to go to be free of damage. I'm also looking at it to make sure that all glue and or plastic residue is absent. And finally, I'm keeping my fingers from touching that so I don't end up with finger oils on that area that's going to have a knock replaced. Okay, I'm going to reattach. I'm going to put a new knock on this arrow. I've got to make sure I keep the area where the glue is going to go, where the new knock's going to be attached, free of my finger oils. If there's any dirt, grime, dust, or I think there might be on there, I need to clean that. I can clean that if it's just dirt, oils, or dust. I can clean it with isopropyl or 91% alcohol. Because it doesn't have any moisturizing compounds in it, and I can rub it, put it on there, and the shaft will dry and it'll be good and clean. I want to make sure when I glue that I use glue made for replacing knocks. In this case, it's Fletch-Tite. There are glues, fast Fletch type. Here's a fast Fletch glue or a super glue. If you use those kinds of glues, those very, very fast drying glues to replace a knock, it can actually make the knock more brittle and cause it to break when the archer is shooting, which would basically be a dry fire. So make sure you use the kind of glue that's made for replacing a knock. I'm going to put a dab of glue on the shaft rather than putting it in the knock. If I put it in the knock, I'll lose track of how much glue is in here. And I'll end up with a mess on the end of my arrow. So put your glue on the shaft where you can see just how much you put, and you're just going to put a half a drop on there. Using glue made for replacing knocks, I'm going to put a small dab of glue right on the arrow shaft itself. And I'm going to take the brand new knock, I'm going to put it on the end of the shaft, and I'm going to turn it, rotate it around the end of the arrow shaft, and then bring it back and stop it so that the notch of the knock is perpendicular to the index vane again. So I'm applying it, go all the way around, that gets the glue spread evenly around the inside of the knock and stop right there perpendicular to the index vane again. And now that arrow can be laid aside for a few hours to be allowed to dry. Now I'm going to show you how to replace a vane on an arrow using a fletching jig. Now when the vane came off, it left some glue residue on the shaft, and I have to get that off of there. In this case, I'm going to use a knife. They make tools, arrow tools that you can use to get that off. I can take a knife and lightly rub it, preserving the surface of the shaft. It's very, very shallow angle here that I'm using to get all that glue off. Once I have the glue completely scraped off the shaft, keeping my fingers off that area, I'm going to put it in a fletching jig and apply a new fletch. If I had residue on here that I couldn't get off with the knife, if it was on there too firmly, I could use acetone to get the glue off, but in most cases you'd want all the vanes to be off and the knock, because if the acetone gets on any of those parts, it can damage them. If I had some heavier dirt on there that I couldn't get off with the blade, I could use Commodore Ajax, an abrasive type cleaner, and clean the shaft with that, dry it good, and then use isopropyl alcohol again on it to pick up the last remaining water molecules to have a dry, clean surface before I attach the new vane. Now I'm going to get a fletching jig. Okay, I've got an arrow that for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use that has only one vane remaining, and it's nearly off. I'm going to take this vane off, and I'm going to show how to apply a new vane to this shaft. I'm going to get my knife, and I'm going to remove this last vane, and I'm going to scrape, like I did before, all remaining glue or plastic material from that shaft. I'd take a lint-free cloth, and I would wipe any of this glue dust off of this shaft, if there's any remaining there. I'm making sure to keep my fingers off of that shaft so that I don't end up with finger oil on there. I'm going to put the shaft in the jig. There's a knock acceptor in this jig. It holds the shaft in place. The flat part of this knob that turns, it's flat on top. That's where the index vein setting would be. There'd be vein number 2. There'd be vein number 3, and then right back to the index vein. I'm going to put a white index vein on this shaft. I've got a clamp here, and I've marked it. I've got marks on the clamps, these black marks where the back of my vein is going to be placed. And if I put the back of every vein there, the veins will be uniformly placed on the shaft. So now I have the vein in the clamp. I'm going to check that fit, make sure that's where I want it to be. I'm going to move my vein to the front knot, front mark, first mark, just like that. Now they're all going to be in the same place. Got my glue on my vein. Now I'm going to carefully lower my clamp into position on the magnet, and I'm going to push my clamp, making sure my shaft's firmly in place. Push my clamp down on the vein. I can walk away and leave it, or I can stay there and count 10 seconds or so. When it's been 10 seconds or more, when the glue is dried, remove the clamp and rotate the shaft to get it ready for the next vein. I'm going to use black now for my non-index veins. Put a black vein in the clamp, making sure the back of the vein is at the same black mark where I had the white one, so they all end up on the same place on the shaft. And then apply my bead of glue, tiny bead, continuous, and push it down in place. And I'm going to hold it there or walk away, let it dry for 10 seconds. 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, 11,000. Once it's dry, I'll remove the clamp, rotate the jig knob one more time, take another black vein out, line it up in my clamp where I want it, put the clamp in position. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, dry. Remove my clamp, pull my arrow out. I now have a refletched arrow that I'd probably give it another couple of hours before I shot it, but it's ready to go. That's all there is to naming the parts of an arrow, inspecting the arrow to make sure that it's safe to shoot. We've talked about how to replace a damaged nock and how to replace damaged veins. It's easy to keep your equipment in shape. If any of this seems more than you want to attempt, again, your local archery shop makes a living doing this kind of thing, and they would love to help you with your archery program. Thank you.